Sarah Martinez sat quietly at the corner of the dimly lit bar, her fingers wrapped around a glass of water. The ice clinked softly as she lifted it to her lips, taking small sips while observing the crowd around her. She had chosen this spot deliberately back against the wall, clear view of all exits, far enough from the main action to avoid unwanted attention. These habits were second nature to her now, ingrained after 15 years of military service that had taken her to the most dangerous corners of the world. The bar was typical for this part of downtown dark wood, brass fixtures, and the kind of atmosphere that attracted young professionals looking to unwind after long days at their corporate jobs. Sarah didn't fit the usual demographic. At 38, she carried herself with a quiet confidence that most people couldn't quite place. Her shoulder-length dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore jeans and a plain black sweater. Nothing that would draw attention to the fact that she was one of the most highly trained special operations officers in the United States Navy. She had come here tonight not by choice, but out of necessity. Her younger sister Emma had been struggling with anxiety and depression for months, and tonight was supposed to be their first real conversation about it. Emma worked at a marketing firm just 3 blocks away, and this bar was her regular spot for happy hour with colleagues. Sarah had agreed to meet her here, despite her preference for quieter, more private venues. As Sarah waited, she watched the crowd with the analytical eye that had been honed through countless missions. There was a group of young men near the bar who had clearly been drinking for a while. They were loud, boisterous, and showing the kind of aggressive behavior that often escalated as the night wore on. Their voices carried over the music, filled with crude jokes and comments about the women in the bar. Sarah mentally noted their positions and behavior patterns, the way she had been trained to assess potential threats. Her phone buzzed, a text from Emma. "Running 15 minutes late, sorry sis, client call went long, order me." Sarah smiled slightly and typed back, "No problem, take your time." She had learned patience in ways most people couldn't imagine. Waiting was part of her job, sometimes for hours in hostile territory, completely still, completely focused. 15 minutes in a comfortable bar was nothing. She signaled the bartender, a friendly woman in her 20s with bright purple hair, and ordered Emma's usual drink. "Cosmopolitan coming right up," the bartender said with a smile. "You want anything else?" "I'm good with water, thanks." The bartender, whose name tag read Kelly, gave her a curious look. "Designated driver." "Something like that," Sarah replied. She had learned long ago that the less she said about herself, the better. People made assumptions, and assumptions were often safer than the truth. As Kelly prepared the pink cocktail, Sarah's attention was drawn back to the group of men. They had moved closer to where she was sitting, and their conversation had taken a darker turn. They were making increasingly inappropriate comments about women in the bar, rating their appearance and making crude speculations about their personal lives. One of them, a tall man with bleached hair and an expensive suit that didn't quite fit his personality, seemed to be the ringleader. "See that brunette over there?" he was saying, gesturing toward a young woman at a high-top table. "Bet she's one of those uptight corporate types who needs someone to show her how to have fun." His friends laughed, and Sarah felt her jaw tighten. She had seen this behavior countless times: men who used alcohol as an excuse to become predators, who viewed women as objects for their entertainment. In her professional life, she had dealt with far worse than bar bullies, but something about the casual cruelty of it always got under her skin. The Cosmopolitan arrived, and Sarah thanked Kelly. She pulled out her phone to check for updates from Emma, but as she did, she became aware that the group's attention had shifted. She could feel them looking at her, and their voices had dropped to what they probably thought was a whisper. "What about the one in the corner?" the bleached ringleader was saying. "She's been nursing that water for 20 minutes, probably thinks she's too good for this place." "She's not even trying," another one added, "just sitting there like she owns the place." Sarah kept her expression neutral, but every instinct she had developed over years of dangerous situations was now alert. She wasn't afraid. These men posed no real threat to someone with her training, but she recognized the pattern. They were working themselves up to some kind of confrontation, feeding off each other's energy and the alcohol in their systems. Her phone buzzed again. "Emma, client call is a nightmare, might be another 20 mins, so sorry." Sarah typed back quickly, "No worries, I'll be here." But as she hit send, she sensed movement in her peripheral vision. The group was approaching, with the ringleader leading the way. He had a drink in each hand, what looked like whiskey shots, and his friends were following behind him like a pack. "Hey there, beautiful," he said as he reached her table, his voice slightly slurred but still controlled. "You look lonely over here all by yourself." Sarah looked up at him calmly. "I'm waiting for someone." "Well, while you wait, why don't you have a drink with us?" He held out one of the shot glasses. "Come on, live a little, it's Friday night." "Thank you, but I'm fine," Sarah replied, her tone polite but firm. She had learned that escalation often started with someone feeling disrespected or dismissed, and while she wasn't afraid of confrontation, she had no interest in creating a scene in a public place. The man's smile faltered slightly. "Oh, come on, don't be like that, we're just being friendly." "I appreciate that, but I prefer to wait for my friend." His friends had formed a loose semicircle around her table now, and Sarah was acutely aware of their positions. The ringleader set both shot glasses down on her table without permission, the amber liquid sloshing slightly. "Look, honey," he said, his tone shifting to something harder, "we're being nice here. The least you could do is be social, have a drink, have a conversation. That's how bars work." Sarah felt the familiar calm that came over her in dangerous situations. Her heart rate remained steady, her breathing controlled. She looked at each of the men briefly, cataloging their positions, their apparent physical condition, their likely reactions to various scenarios. The ringleader was drunk but not incapacitated. His friends were followers, likely to back down if their leader did. There were multiple exit routes, and she was positioned well to defend herself if necessary. "I understand you're trying to be friendly," she said, standing up slowly and deliberately. At 5'6", she wasn't particularly tall, but something in her posture and movement made the men take an unconscious step back. "But I'm not interested in drinking or conversation right now. I hope you understand." The ringleader's face flushed red. "What's your problem, lady? You think you're better than us?" "I think I'm someone who wants to be left alone," Sarah replied. Her voice was steady, carrying the quiet authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. But alcohol and wounded pride were a dangerous combination. The man grabbed one of the shot glasses and, before Sarah could react, threw the contents at her. The whiskey splashed across her sweater and jeans, the sharp smell filling her nostrils. The bar seemed to go quiet for a moment. Other patrons had noticed what was happening, but no one moved to intervene. This was the moment that would define what happened next. Sarah could feel it like a shift in atmospheric pressure before a storm. She looked down at her whiskey-soaked clothes, then back up at the man who had thrown the drink. Her expression hadn't changed, but something in her eyes made him take another step back. "That was a mistake," she said quietly. Kelly, the bartender, had seen what happened and was already reaching for her phone, probably to call security or the police. Other patrons were staring, some pulling out their own phones to record what they clearly expected to be a dramatic confrontation. The ringleader's friends were looking uncertain now. What had seemed like harmless fun was clearly escalating beyond what they had anticipated. But their leader was too drunk and too committed to back down. "Oh, what are you going to do about it?" he sneered. "Call your boyfriend, sue me. You probably couldn't handle yourself in a real fight anyway." Sarah stood perfectly still for a long moment, considering her options. She could walk away, that would be the smart choice, the one that avoided complications. She could call the police and let them handle it. She could demand that management throw the men out. Or she could show them exactly what kind of mistake they had just made. She was still deciding when the man made the choice for her. Emboldened by her apparent passivity, he picked up the second shot glass and threw that at her as well. This time, some of it splashed onto other patrons at nearby tables, who jumped back with exclamations of surprise and anger. "Hey," Kelly shouted from behind the bar. "That's enough, I'm calling the cops." But Sarah raised a hand in Kelly's direction, a small gesture that somehow conveyed authority and control. "That won't be necessary," she said, her voice carrying clearly despite the ambient noise of the bar. "I can handle this." The ringleader laughed. "Handle this? Lady, you're soaked in whiskey and you haven't even raised your voice. What exactly are you going to handle?" Sarah looked at him for a long moment, then at each of his friends in turn. When she spoke again, her voice was different, still quiet, but with an edge that made everyone within earshot pay attention. "My name is Commander Sarah Martinez," she said. "United States Navy. I've spent the last 15 years in special operations, including 3 deployments as part of SEAL Team 7. I've been in active combat in Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, and several other locations that I'm not authorized to discuss." I've led missions behind enemy lines, neutralized high-value targets, and survived situations that would break most people's minds. The bar had gone completely quiet now. Even the music seemed muted. I came here tonight to have a quiet conversation with my sister about her mental health struggles. I ordered her favorite drink and was prepared to wait as long as necessary. I had no intention of causing trouble or drawing attention to myself. She took a step closer to the ringleader, who was now looking significantly less confident. But you've made this personal. You've disrespected me, assaulted me, and disrupted the peace of this establishment and its other patrons. So now you're going to learn something about consequences. The man's friends were already backing away, suddenly finding other parts of the bar very interesting. But he was trapped now by his own pride and the audience he had created. "You're bluffing," he said, but his voice cracked slightly. "Navy SEAL? Women can't even be SEALs." Sarah smiled for the first time since the confrontation began, and it was not a pleasant expression. "You might want to update your information," she said. "The policy changed in 2016, and I was part of the first class of women to complete the training." She was close enough now that she could see the sweat beginning to form on his forehead, despite the cool temperature of the bar. "Here's what's going to happen," she continued. "You're going to apologize to me, to Kelly behind the bar, and to every other patron you've disturbed tonight. You're going to pay for cleaning my clothes. You're going to leave this establishment immediately and not come back. And you're going to remember this night the next time you think about treating a woman with disrespect." The man opened his mouth, probably to argue or make another crude comment, but Sarah held up a single finger. "I should mention," she said conversationally, "that I'm currently on leave while recovering from injuries sustained during a classified operation 6 months ago. My commanding officer has suggested that I might have some unresolved anger issues that I should work through. Something about excessive force and disproportionate response to threats. I've been trying very hard to follow his advice and find healthy ways to manage my stress." She paused, letting that sink in. "But you throwing drinks on me has been surprisingly therapeutic. It's given me a very clear, very justified target for all that unresolved anger, so I want to thank you for that." The ringleader looked around desperately, but his friends had completely abandoned him. Other patrons were watching with fascination, but no one was coming to his aid. Kelly behind the bar was grinning openly. "Look, lady, I'm sorry, okay?" he said, his voice much smaller now. "I didn't know. I was just having some fun. I'll pay for your clothes, whatever." "Commander," Sarah corrected, "and your apology is a good start, but it lacks sincerity. Try again." The man's face went through several different expressions before settling on something approaching genuine regret. "Commander Martinez, I sincerely apologize for my behavior tonight. It was inappropriate, disrespectful, and inexcusable. I'm sorry for throwing drinks on you, and I'm sorry for disturbing the other people here." Sarah nodded. "Better, now apologize to Kelly." He turned toward the bar. "Kelly, I'm sorry for causing trouble in your establishment." "Apology accepted," Kelly said, though her tone suggested she wasn't quite ready to forgive him completely. "And the other patrons?" The man turned to address the room at large. "I apologize to everyone here for my behavior tonight. It won't happen again." Sarah considered this for a moment. "Acceptable, now my clothes." The man fumbled for his wallet and pulled out several bills, holding them out to her. Sarah looked at the money but didn't take it. "Give it to Kelly," she said. "She can donate it to a women's shelter or whatever charity she thinks is appropriate." Kelly accepted the money with a nod. "Now leave," Sarah said simply. The man didn't need to be told twice. He headed for the door, his friends trailing behind him like beaten dogs. As they left, several other patrons began to applaud, but Sarah held up a hand to stop them. "It's over," she said. "Everyone can go back to enjoying their evening." She sat back down at her table, now sticky with whiskey but feeling oddly satisfied. Kelly brought her a towel and a fresh glass of water. "That was amazing," Kelly said. "I've never seen anyone handle jerks like that without throwing a punch." "Sometimes words are more effective than violence," Sarah replied. "Though I have to admit, there was a part of me that wanted to show them some of the hand-to-hand combat techniques I learned in training." "Why didn't you?" Sarah considered the question. "Because I'm not just a soldier anymore. I'm trying to figure out how to be a person again. and people don't usually solve their problems by demonstrating advanced killing techniques in sports bars. Kelly laughed. Fair point. But seriously, you handled that perfectly. Those guys have been coming in here for weeks, bothering female customers. Management hasn't done anything about it because they spend a lot of money. Well, hopefully they'll find somewhere else to spend it. Her phone buzzed. Emma, finally done, on my way, be there in 5 mins. Sarah looked at her whiskey-soaked clothes and smiled. This was going to be an interesting conversation to explain to her sister. Emma was a civilian through and through, a marketing executive who worried about client presentations and budget meetings. She had no frame of reference for the kind of life Sarah had lived, the places she had been, the things she had seen and done. That was part of why Sarah was struggling with her transition back to civilian life. How do you explain to someone who has never left their home state that you've killed people in the service of your country? How do you describe the weight of command, the responsibility of making life-and-death decisions for your team? How do you convey the brotherhood that exists among special operations personnel, the absolute trust and loyalty that binds people together when they face death regularly? And how do you admit that sometimes, despite everything you've sacrificed and achieved, you feel completely lost in the ordinary world? Sarah had been medically retired 6 months ago after an improvised explosive device had left her with a traumatic brain injury and severe damage to her left leg. The physical injuries were healing, but the psychological impact of ending her military career was something she was still processing. For 15 years, she had known exactly who she was and what her purpose was. Now, at 38, she was trying to figure out how to build a completely different life. The incident tonight had been oddly clarifying. For a few minutes, she had felt like herself again, calm, controlled, effective. She had identified a problem, assessed the situation, and resolved it with minimal collateral damage. It was the first time in months that she had felt truly competent. But it also highlighted the challenge she faced. Her instincts, her training, her entire worldview had been shaped by military service. She thought in terms of missions and objectives, threats and responses. The civilian world operated by different rules, with different priorities and different measures of success. Kelly returned with another towel. I called my manager and told her what happened. She said to comp your drinks for the evening, and she's going to ban those guys permanently. That's not necessary, but I appreciate it. Are you kidding? You probably saved us from a dozen future incidents. They've been escalating their behavior for weeks. Tonight could have been much worse if you hadn't handled it the way you did. Sarah nodded, understanding the truth in that. Men like the ringleader rarely stopped escalating on their own. They pushed boundaries until someone pushed back, and if no one did, they kept pushing until someone got seriously hurt. Can I ask you something? Kelly said, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. What's it like, being a Navy SEAL? I mean, I've never met anyone who did that kind of work. Sarah considered how to answer. Most people had a Hollywood version of special operations in their heads, all explosions and dramatic firefights. The reality was much more complex, involving months of careful planning for missions that might last hours, extensive training in everything from languages to cultural sensitivity, and a level of physical and mental preparation that pushed human limits. It's the hardest thing you can imagine and also the most rewarding, she said finally. The training is designed to break you down and rebuild you. Most people don't make it through, but the people who do become part of something bigger than themselves. You learn to trust people with your life, and they learn to trust you with theirs. Do you miss it? Every day, the admission surprised Sarah with its honesty. But I also know it was time to leave. I gave everything I had to that life. Now I need to figure out what comes next. Kelly nodded thoughtfully. Well, if tonight is any indication, you're going to be fine. You've got this whole calm, confident thing that most people would kill for. Before Sarah could respond, she heard a familiar voice calling her name. Emma had arrived, looking rushed and apologetic as she hurried over to their table. Sarah, I'm so sorry I'm late. This client has been driving me crazy all week, and then... Emma stopped mid-sentence as she took in Sarah's appearance. Why are you covered in alcohol, and why does everyone in here keep looking at you? Sarah glanced around and realized that several patrons were indeed still sneaking glances in her direction. Word of the confrontation had clearly spread throughout the bar. It's a long story, Sarah said, standing to hug her sister. But first, I believe this is yours. She gestured to the Cosmopolitan, which had somehow survived the evening's excitement unscathed. Emma picked up the drink and took a sip, her eyes still studying Sarah's whiskey-soaked clothes. Seriously, what happened? Did you get in a fight? Not exactly, Sarah said. More like I prevented one. As they settled into their seats, Sarah realized that the incident had actually provided the perfect opening for the conversation she had been dreading. Emma's anxiety and depression weren't the only mental health challenges their family was dealing with. Sarah's own struggles with post-military transition, with finding purpose and identity outside of service, were just as real and just as difficult. Maybe tonight, instead of just talking about Emma's problems, they could both acknowledge that adjusting to life's challenges, whether civilian anxiety or military transition, was something they could face together. But first, she had some explaining to do about why she was sitting in a bar covered in whiskey, radiating the kind of calm confidence that only came from years of facing down much more dangerous threats than drunk bullies. The real conversation was just beginning. Emma Martinez stared at her sister across the small table, the cosmopolitan halfway to her lips as she processed what Sarah had just told her. The ambient noise of the bar seemed to fade into the background as she tried to reconcile the calm, composed woman sitting across from her with the dramatic confrontation that had apparently just taken place. "Wait, back up," Emma said, setting down her drink. "You're telling me that you just, what, intimidated a group of drunk guys into apologizing by revealing that you're a Navy SEAL?" "That's an oversimplification, but essentially yes," Sarah replied, dabbing at the whiskey stains on her sweater with the towel Kelly had provided. Emma shook her head, a mix of admiration and concern crossing her features. "Sarah, that's incredible, but also kind of terrifying. What if they had gotten violent? What if someone had gotten hurt?" Sarah looked at her sister with the patient expression she had perfected over years of dealing with civilian concerns that seemed almost quaint compared to the threats she was accustomed to facing. Emma worked in marketing for a tech startup, where the biggest crises involved missed deadlines and difficult clients. Her world was one of conference calls and PowerPoint presentations, not life-and-death decisions made in hostile territory. "I've been trained to handle situations far more dangerous than a few drunk businessmen," Sarah said gently. "The training doesn't just cover physical combat. It includes de-escalation, threat assessment, psychological warfare. What happened here was actually a textbook example of how to neutralize a threat without violence." "Psychological warfare," Emma's voice rose slightly. "Sarah, this is a sports bar in downtown Portland, not Afghanistan." The comment hit harder than Emma had probably intended. Sarah felt the familiar disconnect that had been plaguing her since her medical retirement, the sense that she existed in a different reality from everyone around her. Emma didn't mean to minimize her experiences, but the casual dismissal of the skills that had defined Sarah's adult life was exactly the kind of interaction that made her feel like an alien in her own country. "You're right," Sarah said after a moment. "It's not Afghanistan, but the skills are the same and the instincts don't just disappear because I'm back in civilian life." Emma seemed to realize she had touched a nerve. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean. I just worry about you, Sarah. You've been through so much, and I don't want you getting into situations that might make things harder for your recovery." Recovery, the word that everyone used but no one really understood. People assumed that recovery meant healing from physical injuries, getting back to normal. But what was normal for someone who had spent 15 years in a world where normal meant being ready to kill or die for your mission and your teammates? Sarah had been medically retired after an IED explosion in Syria had left her with a traumatic brain injury and damage to her left leg that ended her active duty career. The physical therapy was progressing well. She could walk without a limp now, and the headaches that had plagued her for months were finally becoming less frequent. But the psychological adjustment to civilian life was proving far more challenging than anyone had anticipated. "I know you worry," Sarah said, reaching across the table to squeeze Emma's hand. "But tonight actually felt good. For the first time in months, I felt like myself again. I saw a problem, I assessed the situation, and I handled it effectively. No one got hurt, the threat was neutralized, and order was restored." Emma studied her sister's face in the dim light of the bar. Even covered in whiskey and sitting in a civilian establishment, Sarah carried herself with an unmistakable military bearing. Her posture was perfect, her eyes constantly scanning their surroundings, her hands positioned where they could react quickly to any threat. It was subtle, but once you noticed it, you couldn't unsee it. "Is that how you think about everything?" Emma asked. in terms of threats and missions and objectives? Sarah considered the question honestly. More than I probably should, she admitted. It's hard to turn off 15 years of training. When I walk into a room, I automatically note the exits, assess potential threats, evaluate cover positions. When someone approaches me unexpectedly, my first instinct is to determine if they're hostile. It's not conscious anymore, it's just how my brain works. That must be exhausting. It is, Sarah said, surprising herself with the admission. But it's also what kept me and my teammates alive in some very dangerous places. The challenge now is figuring out how to exist in a world where that level of vigilance isn't necessary, but I can't seem to turn it off. Kelly approached their table again, this time with a fresh towel and what looked like a small bottle of stain remover. "Sorry to interrupt," she said, "but I thought this might help with your clothes. We keep it behind the bar for incidents like this." "Thank you," Sarah said, accepting the items. "That's very thoughtful. It's the least I can do after what you did for us tonight. Those guys have been a problem for weeks, and management kept saying their hands were tied because they're good customers. But after what happened, my manager called the owner, and they're permanently banned from all 3 locations." "3 locations?" Emma asked. "Yeah, it's a small chain. Apparently word travels fast in the service industry about people who cause trouble. What you did tonight probably protected servers and customers at bars all over the city." After Kelly left, Emma looked at her sister with a new understanding. "You really did something important tonight, didn't you?" Sarah shrugged. "I dealt with a problem, it's what I was trained to do." "But it's more than that," Emma insisted. "You protected people, you stood up for what was right, you used your skills and experience to make a positive difference." She paused. "Maybe that's your answer." "My answer to what?" "To what comes next. You've been struggling with finding purpose outside the military, right? Well, tonight you found purpose. You helped people." Sarah felt something shift inside her chest, a small spark of recognition. Emma was right, though she probably didn't fully understand the implications of what she was saying. For months, Sarah had been adrift, going through the motions of physical therapy and psychological counseling while feeling increasingly disconnected from any sense of meaningful purpose. In the military, purpose had been clear and constant. Every mission, every training exercise, every decision was part of serving something larger than herself. She had been part of an elite unit tasked with protecting national security, and that mission had given her life structure and meaning. But civilian life seemed to lack that clarity. People talked about finding yourself, pursuing your passion, building a career. But what did any of that mean to someone who had spent their adult life in service to their country? "I've been thinking about that a lot lately," Sarah said. "The counselor at the VA keeps asking me about my goals, my plans for the future, but I don't know how to think about the future in civilian terms. My goals were always mission-focused, objective-based. Eliminate the target, extract the asset, complete the operation. Success was measurable and absolute." "What kind of missions?" Emma asked. "I mean, if you can talk about it." Sarah was quiet for a long moment. Most of her service record was classified, and even the parts that weren't were difficult to explain to someone without military experience. How do you describe the weight of command in hostile territory? How do you explain what it's like to make split-second decisions that determine whether people live or die? "A lot of it I can't discuss," she said finally. "But I led reconnaissance missions in some very dangerous places. We gathered intelligence, neutralized high-value targets, conducted rescue operations. I was responsible for teams of highly trained operators in situations where there was no margin for error." Emma leaned forward, genuinely interested. "What was that like, being in charge, I mean?" "Terrifying and exhilarating at the same time," Sarah said. "You're constantly aware that every decision you make affects not just the mission, but the lives of people who trust you completely. Your teammates put their lives in your hands, and you put yours in theirs. There's a level of mutual dependence and trust that. Well, I've never experienced anything like it in civilian life." "Do you miss it?" "I miss the clarity," Sarah said without hesitation. "I miss knowing exactly what my purpose was, exactly what was expected of me. I miss being part of something bigger than myself. I miss the brotherhood, and yes, the few of us women called it brotherhood too. I miss knowing that what I was doing mattered, that it made a difference." Emma sipped her cosmopolitan thoughtfully. "But what you did tonight mattered too. You made a difference for Kelly, for the other customers here, probably for women those guys would have bothered in the future." It's not the same scale, Sarah protested. Maybe not, but impact isn't just about scale. Sometimes it's about being in the right place at the right time with the right skills to help people who need it. Before Sarah could respond, her phone rang. She glanced at the screen and her expression shifted to something more alert and focused. "I need to take this," she said, answering the call. "Commander Martinez." Emma watched as her sister's entire demeanor changed. Her posture became more rigid. Her voice took on the crisp authority that came with years of military command. Even sitting in a civilian bar covered in whiskey, Sarah was instantly, unmistakably a military officer. "Yes, sir, I understand. No, I'm currently in Portland. Yes, sir, I can be there. When? I see. Yes, sir, I'll make arrangements immediately." Emma felt a chill run through her. She had seen Sarah take military calls before, during her rare visits home while on active duty, but something about this one was different. There was an urgency in Sarah's voice that suggested this wasn't routine. Sarah ended the call and sat in silence for a moment, her mind clearly processing whatever she had just learned. "Sarah," Emma said quietly, "what's wrong?" Sarah looked at her sister, and for the first time that evening, Emma saw uncertainty in her eyes. "That was Admiral Richardson," Sarah said. "He's the head of Naval Special Warfare Command. There's been an incident." "What kind of incident?" Sarah hesitated. "I can't give you details, but there's a situation involving former SEAL Team 7 members. 3 of them have been kidnapped." Emma felt her blood run cold. "Your former teammates." "2 of them were under my command during my last deployment," Sarah confirmed. "The third was part of our sister unit. They were working private security for a humanitarian organization in Colombia, and they were taken 4 days ago." "4 days? Why are they just calling you now?" "Because the initial rescue operation failed," Sarah said grimly. "The Colombian military attempted an extraction yesterday. It went badly. 1 hostage was killed, and the other 2 were moved to an unknown location." Emma stared at her sister, beginning to understand. "They want you to go get them." "They want me to consult," Sarah corrected. "I'm medically retired, remember? I can't participate in active operations, but I know the terrain where they were taken, and I know how these men think, how they operate. I've worked with them in similar situations before." "Similar situations meaning?" "Hostage rescue in hostile territory," Sarah said simply. "It's what my team specialized in." Emma felt a wave of conflicting emotions. Part of her was proud that the Navy still valued Sarah's expertise enough to call her for consultation on a critical mission. But part of her was terrified at the thought of her sister, still recovering from serious injuries, getting pulled back into the dangerous world she had supposedly left behind. "You're going, aren't you?" Emma said. It wasn't really a question. Sarah looked at her hands, still stained with whiskey from the evening's confrontation. These are people I served with, people who trusted me with their lives in combat. I can't just sit here knowing they're in danger when I might be able to help." "But you're still recovering. The doctors said you shouldn't be under stress, that you need time to heal." "The doctors don't understand what it means to leave teammates behind," Sarah said firmly. "That's not something you recover from. That's something that follows you for the rest of your life." Emma felt tears beginning to form in her eyes. She had been looking forward to this evening for weeks, hoping to finally have the honest conversation with her sister that they had been avoiding since Sarah's return from active duty. Emma had been struggling with anxiety and depression, but she had also been worried about Sarah's adjustment to civilian life. Tonight was supposed to be about supporting each other, about finding a way forward together. Instead, Sarah was about to disappear back into the military world that Emma had never understood and could never be part of. "How long will you be gone?" Emma asked. "I don't know. The Admiral wants me in Washington tomorrow for a briefing. After that," Sarah shrugged. "It depends on what the intelligence looks like and whether they can locate the hostages." "And if they can't locate them?" Sarah was quiet for a long moment. "Then I'll probably be gone for a while." Emma felt something break inside her chest. She had been holding herself together for months, trying to manage her anxiety about work, about her relationship with her boyfriend, about her mental health. Sarah's return to civilian life had been one of the few bright spots in her world, the hope that they could rebuild the close relationship they had shared as children before the military took Sarah away for 15 years. Now, just as they were starting to connect again, the military was taking her sister away once more. Sarah said softly, reaching across the table. I know this is hard, I know the timing is terrible, but I have to do this. I know, Emma whispered. I was really looking forward to having you around for a while, to getting to know my sister again instead of the soldier. You want to know something? Sarah said. Tonight, when I was dealing with those drunk guys, I felt more like myself than I have in months. Not because of the confrontation, but because I was able to help someone. I was able to use my skills and experience to protect people and solve a problem. She paused, organizing her thoughts. I've been struggling with who I am outside the military. But maybe the answer isn't to become someone completely different. Maybe it's about finding ways to be the person the military made me, but in service of different missions. Emma looked at her sister, really looked at her, and saw something she hadn't noticed before. Despite the whiskey stains and the casual clothes, despite being in a civilian bar having a personal conversation, Sarah radiated the quiet confidence of someone who knew exactly who she was and what she was capable of. The military hadn't just given her skills and training, it had forged her into someone who could be counted on in the most difficult situations. You're going to go to Colombia, aren't you? Emma said. Not just to consult, you're going to find a way to be part of the rescue mission. Sarah didn't answer directly, but Emma could see the truth in her eyes. Be careful, Emma said simply. Come home safe. I always do, Sarah replied, though they both knew that wasn't entirely true. She had come home injured, changed, struggling to find her place in a world that suddenly felt foreign and disconnected from everything that had given her life meaning. But for the first time in months, Sarah felt a sense of purpose beginning to crystallize. Her former teammates needed her, and she had skills that could make the difference between their rescue and their death. The call from Admiral Richardson wasn't just a consultation request. It was an opportunity to prove that her value to the military didn't end with her medical retirement. As Emma finished her Cosmopolitan and Sarah planned her immediate departure for Washington, neither sister could have predicted that this mission would become the catalyst for Sarah's transformation from a struggling veteran to one of the most sought-after private security consultants in the world. The journey was about to begin, and it would take Sarah back into the darkness she knew so well, in service of the brotherhood that had defined her adult life. The Pentagon's corridors felt simultaneously familiar and foreign to Sarah as she made her way through the maze of security checkpoints and sterile hallways. 18 hours after receiving the call at the bar, she stood outside Conference Room 2C950, wearing her dress blue uniform for the first time since her retirement ceremony 6 months earlier. The fabric felt strange against her skin, both comfortable in its familiarity and alien in its reminder of the life she had left behind. Admiral Richardson had requested her presence for a classified briefing regarding the hostage situation in Colombia. What he hadn't mentioned during their phone call was that she would be walking into a room full of people who had shaped the trajectory of her military career, for better and worse. She straightened her shoulders, checked her appearance one final time, and knocked on the conference room door. Enter, came the authoritative voice from inside. Sarah opened the door and stepped into a room that contained some of the most senior officers in Naval Special Warfare Command. Admiral Richardson sat at the head of a long table, his weathered face bearing the stress lines that came with years of making life-and-death decisions. To his right was Captain James Mitchell, her former commanding officer, and the man who had recommended her for promotion to commander. To his left sat Lieutenant Colonel Maria Santos from Marine Special Operations Command, and next to her was someone Sarah hadn't expected to see. Doctor, a psychologist from the Department of Veterans Affairs. But it was the man sitting at the far end of the table who caused Sarah's breath to catch in her throat. Master Chief Petty Officer Daniel Ghost had been her senior enlisted advisor for 3 years and had saved her life more times than she could count. He was supposed to be one of the hostages. Commander Martinez, Admiral Richardson said, standing as she entered. Thank you for coming on such short notice. Admiral, Sarah replied, snapping to attention and rendering a crisp salute. Thank you for including me in this briefing. At ease, Commander. Please take a seat. As Sarah settled into her chair, she couldn't help but notice the thick manila folders in front of each attendee, marked with the highest levels of security classification. This wasn't just a consultation. This was a full operational briefing. Before we begin, Admiral Richardson said, I need to address something. Doctor is here at my request to evaluate your fitness for participation in this operation. Sarah felt her jaw tighten. Sir, I was under the impression that I was here to provide consultation based on my experience in the region and with the personnel involved. That was the original plan, the Admiral replied, but circumstances have changed significantly since we spoke yesterday. Captain Mitchell leaned forward. Sarah, the situation in Colombia has deteriorated rapidly. The failed rescue attempt we mentioned has triggered a series of events that require immediate action. What kind of events? Sarah asked, though she had a sinking feeling she already knew the answer. Master Chief spoke for the first time. The hostage-takers have made contact. They're demanding the release of a high-value target currently in U.S. custody, and they've given us 72 hours to comply. If their demands aren't met, they've threatened to execute the hostages on live video. Sarah felt her professional instincts kick in, pushing aside the personal emotions that had been clouding her judgment since retiring. Who's the HVT they want released? Lieutenant Colonel Santos answered. Carlos. He's a former Colombian military officer turned arms dealer who's been providing weapons to insurgent groups throughout South America. We captured him 8 months ago during a joint operation, and he's currently being held at a classified detention facility. Let me guess, Sarah said. The operation where was captured was one that I planned and led. Correct, Admiral Richardson confirmed. Which is why the hostage-takers specifically requested your involvement in any negotiations. The room went silent as the implications of that statement settled in. Sarah had been involved in hundreds of operations during her career, but the capture had been particularly significant. It had taken months of intelligence gathering and planning to locate him, and the actual operation had required her team to infiltrate a heavily fortified compound in the Colombian mountains. The mission had been a complete success, was captured without any U.S. casualties, and his weapons network was effectively dismantled. But now it seemed that success was coming back to haunt her. They know I was involved, Sarah asked. They know you led the operation, Captain Mitchell confirmed. Our intelligence suggests that has been planning this kidnapping for months as a way to force his release. The humanitarian organization your former teammates were working for was specifically chosen because knew their security team included former SEAL Team 7 members. Doctor spoke for the first time. Commander Martinez, I've reviewed your medical records and your psychological evaluation reports from your retirement proceedings. There are concerns about your readiness to return to active operations. Sarah felt a flash of anger. Doctor, with all due respect, my medical retirement was based on physical injuries, not psychological unfitness. My performance evaluations were consistently outstanding throughout my career. That's true, Doctor acknowledged. But you've also been dealing with significant adjustment challenges since leaving active duty. Your counselor at the VA has noted struggles with purpose, identity, and integration into civilian life. There are concerns that returning to a high-stress operational environment could be detrimental to your recovery process. My recovery process will be significantly more difficult if I allow former teammates to die because I was too afraid to help them, Sarah replied firmly. Admiral Richardson held up a hand to stop the brewing argument. The decision about your involvement isn't entirely up to us anyway. The hostage-takers have made it clear that they want you personally involved in the negotiations. They've specifically requested that you be the primary contact for any communication. Which means what exactly? Master Chief pulled out a satellite phone and placed it on the table. They've given us a secure communication channel. They want to speak directly with you within the next 6 hours, or they're going to kill one of the hostages as a demonstration of their seriousness. Sarah stared at the phone, feeling the weight of 15 years of military training and experience crystallizing into this moment. Everything she had learned, every mission she had led, every decision she had made under pressure had prepared her for situations exactly like this. What's the current status of the hostages? She asked, her voice taking on the crisp, professional tone that had characterized her command style. Captain Mitchell opened his folder. 3 personnel were taken 4 days ago. Lieutenant Commander Jake Harrison, Petty Officer First Class Mike, and Staff Sergeant Maria from Marine Force Recon. Harrison and were under your direct command during your last deployment. Was part of the joint team you worked with during the operation. Their condition? Unknown. The failed rescue attempt resulted in the death of a Colombian guide who was taken with them, but we have no current intelligence on the condition or location of our people. Sarah closed her eyes for a moment, visualizing the faces of the three missing operators. Jake Harrison had been one of her most trusted team leaders, a steady presence who could be counted on to execute complex missions with precision and calm. Mike was brilliant with communications and electronics, capable of establishing secure communications in the most challenging environments. She had worked with Maria on only one previous operation, but the Marine had impressed her with her tactical skills and unflappable demeanor under pressure. All three were highly trained, experienced operators who would be extremely difficult to hold against their will. The fact that they had been successfully kidnapped and held for 4 days suggested that their captors were equally professional and well-equipped. "What's the intelligence picture on the hostage takers?" Sarah asked. Lieutenant Colonel Santos consulted her notes. "We believe they're a combination of former Colombian military personnel and international mercenaries. The operation shows a high level of planning and sophistication. They knew exactly who they were targeting, when and where to find them, and how to execute a clean kidnapping without leaving significant forensic evidence." "Which suggests they have high-level intelligence support," Sarah observed. "Correct. We suspect there's a leak somewhere in the Colombian government or military, but we haven't been able to identify the source." Doctor interrupted the tactical discussion. "Commander Martinez, I need to ask you directly, how do you feel about the prospect of returning to active operations? Are you confident in your ability to perform under the extreme stress of a hostage rescue scenario?" Sarah looked at the psychologist for a long moment before answering. "Doctor, 6 months ago I was leading special operations missions in some of the most dangerous places on Earth. My medical retirement was due to physical injuries that have now healed sufficiently for me to pass a full physical fitness test. My psychological state is not a factor in my ability to execute my duties as a military officer." "But you're no longer a military officer," Doctor pointed out. "You're a retired veteran struggling with civilian transition. The two situations are entirely different." "Are they?" Sarah asked. "Because sitting in this room discussing operational parameters and threat assessments, I feel more clear-headed and focused than I have since leaving active duty. This is what I was trained for. This is what I'm good at." Admiral Richardson leaned back in his chair, studying Sarah's face. "There's something else we need to discuss. If we proceed with your involvement in this operation, it won't be in an official capacity. Your medical retirement status precludes active participation in military operations." "Then what exactly are you proposing?" "We're proposing to contract you as a private consultant," Captain Mitchell explained. "You would work directly with our intelligence and tactical teams, but you wouldn't officially be part of the military chain of command." "Which means what in practical terms?" "It means you would have significant operational autonomy," Admiral Richardson replied. "You would be responsible for designing and executing the approach to this situation based on your assessment of the best course of action." Sarah felt something shift inside her chest, a familiar sensation she had experienced before major operations. It was a combination of anticipation, focus, and the kind of calm clarity that came with accepting a mission that would test every skill she had ever developed. "What's the timeline?" she asked. Master Chief checked his watch. "You need to make initial contact with the hostage takers in 5 hours and 37 minutes. After that, we have 66 hours to either meet their demands or execute a rescue operation." "And the rescue option?" "Complicated," Lieutenant Colonel Santos admitted. "We have no current intelligence on their location. The failed Colombian operation scattered our surveillance assets, and we're essentially starting from zero on tracking them down." "Which is where your expertise becomes critical," Admiral Richardson added. "You know the terrain, you know the players, and you know how special operations personnel think and behave under captivity. We need someone who can get inside the heads of both the hostages and their captors." Sarah looked around the table at the assembled officers. These were people who had shaped her career, who had trusted her with increasingly complex and dangerous missions over the years. The fact that they were asking for her help now, despite her medical retirement status, was both humbling and validating. But more than that, it was an opportunity to do what she had been struggling to find since leaving active duty, to use her skills and experience in service of something larger than herself. If I agree to this, she said, I want full operational authority. I design the approach, I select the team, I make the tactical decisions. No interference from people who aren't on the ground. Agreed, Admiral Richardson said without hesitation. Doctor looked alarmed. Admiral, I must protest. Commander Martinez has been out of active operations for 6 months. She's dealing with significant psychological adjustment issues. Giving her full operational authority in a high-stakes hostage situation could be extremely dangerous. Sarah turned to face the psychologist directly. Doctor, let me ask you something. Have you ever been responsible for the lives of highly trained operators in hostile territory? Have you ever had to make split-second decisions that determine whether people live or die? No, but... Then, with all due respect, you're not qualified to assess my fitness for this mission. I've successfully led dozens of operations in hostile environments. I've brought my people home alive from situations that would break most people's minds. The fact that I'm struggling with civilian adjustment doesn't mean I've lost my ability to do the job I was trained for. The room was silent for a moment. Finally, Admiral Richardson spoke. Commander Martinez, are you prepared to accept this assignment? Sarah looked one more time around the table, then at the satellite phone that would connect her to the people holding her former teammates hostage. Yes, sir, I am. As she reached for the phone, Sarah realized that the conversation with her sister Emma the night before had been more prophetic than either of them had realized. Emma had suggested that Sarah's future might involve finding ways to use her military skills in service of different missions. This mission would prove to be exactly that, the first step in Sarah's evolution from a struggling veteran to a highly sought-after private operator who specialized in the most challenging rescue operations in the world. But first, she had to bring her people home alive. The satellite phone felt surprisingly heavy in Sarah's hands as she held it in the secure communications room 3 levels below the Pentagon's main conference areas. The room was windowless, its walls lined with equipment that could monitor, record, and analyze every aspect of the upcoming conversation. Admiral Richardson sat to her left, while Master Chief operated the recording and tracing equipment. Captain Mitchell and Lieutenant Colonel Santos watched from behind a glass partition, ready to provide real-time intelligence support. Doctor had been excluded from this phase of the operation at Sarah's insistence, though her concerns about Sarah's psychological readiness echoed in the back of everyone's minds. Signal strength is optimal, reported quietly. All recording and tracing systems are active. Remember, they're probably using equally sophisticated equipment, so assume everything is being monitored on their end as well. Sarah nodded, her breathing steady and controlled. She had made hundreds of high-stakes communications during her military career, but this felt different. The people she was about to speak with weren't enemy combatants or foreign intelligence officers. They were professionals who had specifically targeted her former teammates as leverage against her. Initiate contact, Admiral Richardson ordered. Sarah pressed the connection button and activated the secure channel. The phone rang twice before a voice answered in accented English. Commander Martinez, we have been expecting your call. The voice was calm, professional, with the kind of controlled delivery that suggested military training. Sarah recognized the tone. It was the same way she sounded during operational communications. This is Martinez. I'm here to discuss the release of 3 American personnel who are being held against their will. Ah, so formal, so military. I expected as much from the woman who led the operation that captured Carlos. Sarah felt her jaw tighten but kept her voice neutral. I'm here to negotiate for the safe return of Lieutenant Commander Harrison, Petty Officer, and Staff Sergeant. What are your terms? My terms are simple, Commander. Carlos will be released from American custody and transported to a location of my choosing within 60 hours. In exchange, your former teammates will be returned unharmed. I'll need proof of life before any negotiations can proceed. There was a pause, followed by sounds of movement. Then Sarah heard a voice that made her chest tighten with recognition. Commander, this is Harrison. Jake's voice was strained but clear. And are alive, we're being treated according to Geneva Convention standards. The line went dead for a moment, then the original voice returned. As you can hear, your people are currently unharmed, but my patience is limited, Commander, 60 hours. Wait, Sarah said quickly. I need more information. Where and how do you want delivered? What guarantees do I have that you'll honor the exchange? You have my word as a professional soldier, the voice replied. And before you ask, yes, I am a soldier. Former Lieutenant Colonel Vega, Colombian Army Special Forces. I served my country for 20 years before it betrayed me. Sarah felt pieces clicking into place. During her research for the operation, she had encountered references to Colombian military officers who had been involved in anti-corruption efforts that ended their careers. Vega's name had appeared in several intelligence reports as someone who had been forced out of the military after investigating weapons trafficking that reached into the highest levels of government. Colonel Vega, Sarah said, using his former rank deliberately. I understand your motivation, but holding American military personnel hostage isn't going to solve your problems with the Colombian government. But it will solve my immediate problem, which is securing the release of the one man who can prove that I was not the traitor they claimed I was. Carlos has evidence that will clear my name and expose the real corruption in my former command. Admiral Richardson was frantically scribbling notes and passing them to the intelligence analysts behind the glass partition. This was new information. Their intelligence on Vega had not included his potential innocence or his personal relationship to the case. Colonel, Sarah continued, even if I wanted to arrange release, I don't have the authority to make that decision. You're asking for something that involves multiple government agencies and international law. Then I suggest you find someone who does have that authority, Commander. Because in 59 hours and 37 minutes, I will begin executing your former teammates, starting with the youngest. The line went dead. Sarah set down the phone and looked at Admiral Richardson. Is 26, she said quietly. He's the youngest. I heard. The Admiral's face was grim. What's your assessment? Vega is a professional. His approach is methodical. His timeline is specific, and he's clearly done extensive research on both the operational and personal aspects of this situation. He knows exactly who he's dealing with and what leverage he has. Do you think he'll follow through on his threat? Sarah considered the question carefully. Based on his tone and approach, yes, he's not bluffing. He has a specific objective, and he's prepared to do whatever is necessary to achieve it. Master Chief looked up from his equipment. The signal originated from somewhere in the Cordillera Central Mountain Range, approximately 200 kilometers south of. But they're using sophisticated relay systems. I couldn't get a precise fix. Captain Mitchell's voice came through the intercom from the observation room. Sarah, what do you know about that region? It's perfect for this kind of operation, she replied. Extremely difficult terrain, limited infrastructure, dozens of caves and natural hiding places that are nearly impossible to detect from the air. If you wanted to hide hostages where they couldn't be found, that's exactly where you'd go. Could you find them? Sarah was quiet for a long moment, mentally mapping the terrain and considering the tactical challenges. Possibly, but it would require on-ground reconnaissance, local intelligence, and a significant time investment. We don't have time for a traditional search and locate mission. Admiral Richardson leaned back in his chair. So our options are either meet his demands or attempt a rescue operation without knowing where the hostages are located. There's a third option, Sarah said slowly, but it's high risk and would require Vega to cooperate. Explain. We arrange a face-to-face meeting. Vega wants released, but he also wants to clear his name. If his story about being framed is true, then he might be willing to discuss alternatives to simply releasing a high-value weapons dealer. You're suggesting you meet with him personally. I'm suggesting we offer him something he wants more than freedom, the opportunity to prove his innocence through official channels. Lieutenant Colonel Santos's voice came through the intercom. That's assuming he's telling the truth about being framed. Our intelligence suggests he was involved in the weapons trafficking we've been tracking. Then this meeting would be a way to determine the truth, Sarah replied. If he's lying, we'll know quickly. If he's telling the truth, we might be able to find a solution that saves the hostages without releasing a dangerous criminal. Admiral Richardson considered this. It's incredibly risky, Sarah. You'd be putting yourself in the hands of someone who has already demonstrated his willingness to use violence to achieve his objectives. Sir, I've been in the hands of people far more dangerous than Colonel Vega, and right now, he needs me alive more than he needs me dead. I'm his only link to getting what he wants. What would you need for this kind of operation? Sarah felt her mind shifting into operational planning mode, the familiar mental state where complex problems became manageable through systematic analysis and tactical thinking. I'd need a small team, maybe 4 people maximum, local intelligence support, secure communications, and authorization to negotiate on behalf of the U.S. government. Sarah, Admiral Richardson said carefully, you understand that if something goes wrong, we can't officially acknowledge your involvement in this operation. You'd be operating as a private contractor without official backup. I understand the risks, sir. What Sarah didn't say was that the prospect of returning to operational status, even temporarily and unofficially, felt like coming home for the first time in 6 months. The complex planning, the risk assessment, the pressure of making decisions that would determine whether people lived or died. This was the environment where she had always functioned best. The months since her medical retirement had been characterized by a constant sense of being adrift, of trying to find purpose and identity in a civilian world that seemed disconnected from everything that had given her life meaning. But sitting in this secure communications room, planning a high-stakes rescue operation, she felt the clarity and focus that had defined her military career. Master Chief looked up from his equipment again. Commander, I'm getting another incoming signal on the secure channel. Sarah picked up the phone immediately. Martinez. Commander, I have been thinking about our conversation. Perhaps there is room for discussion after all. I'm listening, Colonel. There is a village called San, approximately 50 kilometers north of where you tracked my signal. Tomorrow at 1400 hours, come alone to the church in the center of the village. We will talk. Colonel, I'll need guarantees about my safety and proof that the hostages remain unharmed. You have my word as an officer and a gentleman. Bring whatever evidence you can find about my military record and the circumstances of my dismissal from the Army. If you can prove that there are alternatives to release, I am willing to listen. And if I can't? Then in 54 hours, you will watch your former teammates die, knowing that you had the power to save them but chose not to use it. The line went dead again. Admiral Richardson was already reaching for his secure phone to contact the intelligence division. We need everything we can find on Lieutenant Colonel Vega's military service record, his dismissal from the Colombian Army, and his connection to the weapons trafficking network. I want it all within 6 hours. Sir, Sarah said, I'll need to leave for Colombia immediately if I'm going to make that meeting. Absolutely not. This could be a trap designed specifically to capture or kill you. It could be, Sarah agreed. But it's also our best chance to resolve this situation without either releasing or losing 3 American operators. Captain Mitchell's voice came through the intercom. Sarah, even if Vega is sincere about negotiating, you'd be walking into a situation where you're completely isolated and outnumbered. If something goes wrong, we have no way to extract you. Then we make sure nothing goes wrong, Sarah replied simply. She looked around the room at the faces of people who had known her throughout her military career. They had trusted her with increasingly complex and dangerous missions over the years, and she had consistently delivered results. But this was different this time. She would be operating without official support, without backup, relying entirely on her own skills and judgment. I need to make a phone call, she said. To whom? Someone who might be able to help with local intelligence and logistics. What Sarah didn't tell them was that she was calling a former CIA operative who now worked private security in South America. Had been her contact during the original operation, and he had resources in Colombia that could prove invaluable for this kind of mission. She also didn't mention that had been trying to recruit her for his private security firm since her medical retirement, offering her the kind of operational autonomy and meaningful work that she had been struggling to find in civilian life. This mission would prove to be more than just a rescue operation. It would be Sarah's introduction to a world where former military and intelligence personnel used their skills in service of private clients and objectives that existed outside the traditional government structure. But first, she had to survive her meeting with Colonel Vega and find a way to bring her people home alive. The small church in San sat on a hillside overlooking a valley that stretched toward the Magdalena River. Sarah arrived 30 minutes early, having spent the previous 18 hours gathering intelligence and preparing for what could be either a breakthrough negotiation or an elaborate trap. The overnight flight had given her time to review everything the Pentagon's Intelligence Division had compiled on Lieutenant Colonel Vega, and the picture that emerged was far more complex than anyone had initially understood. Vega had been a decorated officer with 20 years of exemplary service, including multiple commendations for operations against drug cartels and insurgent groups. His dismissal from the Colombian Army had come after he had begun investigating weapons disappearances from military arsenals weapons that were later found in the hands of the very groups he had been fighting against. When he had attempted to report his findings up the chain of command, he had been accused of being the source of the weapons trafficking and summarily dismissed. The evidence suggested that Vega had been framed by senior officers who were actually involved in the corruption he had been trying to expose. Carlos had been their connection to the illegal weapons trade, which meant he possessed information that could both clear Vega's name and implicate high-ranking Colombian military officials. Sarah sat in the last pew of the small stone church, her hands folded in her lap as she observed the details of her surroundings. The building was old, probably dating to the colonial period, with thick walls and small windows that provided excellent defensive positions. There were 3 entrances, the main door through which she had entered, a side door near the altar, and what appeared to be a door leading to a bell tower. She had noted the positions of these exits immediately upon entering, along with potential cover positions and lines of sight. Her earpiece crackled softly. "Overwatch in position," came the voice of who was stationed on a hilltop approximately 800 meters away with a sniper rifle and spotting scope. "I count 4 vehicles in the village, 2 that weren't here yesterday. No visible movement around the church." Sarah touched her throat mic briefly to acknowledge the transmission. Had arrived in Colombia 12 hours before her, using his network of local contacts to establish surveillance and provide backup support for the meeting. It wasn't official U.S. government support, but it was the best she could do given the unofficial nature of her mission. At exactly 1400 hours, the main door of the church opened. A man entered alone, moving with the controlled precision of someone accustomed to potentially hostile environments. He was average height, stocky build, with graying hair and the kind of weathered face that came from years of outdoor operations. He wore civilian clothes, jeans, and a simple button-down shirt, but carried himself with unmistakable military bearing. "Colonel Vega," Sarah said, standing as he approached. "Commander Martinez." He stopped approximately 10 feet away, close enough for conversation but far enough to react if necessary. "Thank you for coming." "Thank you for agreeing to this meeting. I brought the information you requested." Sarah held up a manila folder containing copies of Vega's military service record, his dismissal proceedings, and the intelligence reports related to the weapons trafficking investigation. She had also included analysis from U.S. intelligence agencies that corroborated his claims about being framed. Vega gestured toward the front pews. "Shall we sit? This conversation may take some time." As they settled into seats facing each other across the narrow aisle, Sarah could see the strain in Vega's eyes, the look of a man who had been carrying a tremendous burden for an extended period. "Colonel, before we discuss terms, I need proof that the hostages remain unharmed." Vega pulled out a satellite phone and speed-dialed a number. After a moment, he handed the phone to Sarah. "Commander," Jake Harrison's voice was clear and strong, "and are both okay. We're being held in what appears to be a natural cave system, well supplied and guarded but not mistreated." "Jake, I need you to describe your surroundings in detail." Harrison's description confirmed Sarah's assessment of the terrain. They were being held in the Cordillera Central Mountains, probably in one of the extensive limestone cave networks that characterized the region. The guards were professional, disciplined, and well-armed, which aligned with Vega's background and the sophistication of the operation. "Time's up," Vega said, reclaiming the phone after 2 minutes. "Now, Commander, what have you learned about my situation?" Sarah opened the folder and spread several documents on the pew between them. "According to U.S. intelligence analysis, your claims appear to be substantiated. The weapons trafficking operation you investigated was being run by Colonel and 2 other senior officers in your command. They used Carlos as their connection to insurgent buyers, and when you got too close to the truth, they made you the scapegoat." Vega's face showed the first emotion Sarah had seen from him, a mixture of vindication and deep sadness. 20 years of loyal service, and my own commanders destroyed my career to cover their crimes. The evidence we have could be used to clear your name through official channels. The Colombian government has been cooperating with U.S. anti-corruption efforts, and with the right approach, we might be able to get your case reopened. Might, Vega repeated. Commander, I have spent 18 months living as a fugitive while the real criminals continue to profit from their illegal activities. I need more than possibilities, I need guarantees. Sarah leaned forward. Colonel, what you're asking for the release of Carlos isn't something I can authorize. Is a high-value prisoner with intelligence about weapons trafficking throughout South America. Even if I wanted to arrange his release, it would take authorization from the highest levels of the U.S. government. Then get that authorization. It's not that simple. Information has been used to disrupt multiple trafficking networks and prevent weapons from reaching terrorist organizations. Releasing him would potentially cost lives and damage ongoing operations. Vega was quiet for a long moment, staring at the documents spread between them. Commander, do you have children? The question caught Sarah off guard. No. I have 3 daughters. Before my dismissal, they were proud of their father's service to Colombia. Now they live in shame, believing that their father is a traitor and a criminal. My youngest is only 12 years old. Do you understand what that kind of stigma does to a child? Sarah felt something shift in her chest. Throughout her military career, she had been trained to think in terms of mission objectives and acceptable losses. Personal stories were complications that could interfere with rational decision-making. But sitting in this small church, looking at a man whose life had been destroyed by the same kind of corruption her missions had been designed to combat, she found herself seeing the human cost of larger geopolitical operations. I understand the personal stakes for you, Colonel, but I also have to consider the lives that could be lost if